Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Now, before we get into the interview, I'd like to thank Pega for sponsoring the podcast for the coming month. You see, it's almost time for Pega World Inspire, the annual conference from Pegasystems. Join them online for free on May the 4th from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's 2 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. UK time to learn how the world's most impactful companies are driving digital transformation. They'll have compelling keynotes, demos, and case studies in a highly interactive virtual format. But they're not stopping there, as there will also be a few surprises as well. So go to pegaworld.com to register for free and check out the full agenda. I must say that I've attended the last several Pega Worlds in person and virtually, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So go register today at pegaworld.com. Now, let's get back to the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Professor, no less, Michael Solomon, who is a friend of the podcast, I guess I could describe him as, because we spoke back in 2017 about the 12th edition of Consumer Behavior, Buying, Having, and Being, which is a bit of a Bible when it comes to textbooks or just general kind of books about customer behavior. But he's now back. We're going to talk about a new book. But before we get into that, Michael, welcome back to the podcast. And how are you?
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for having me back. It's always great to talk to you. And now you've cheered me up and made my day.
Brilliant. So for people that aren't familiar with you and your work, Michael, can you just give us a quick thumbnail sketch about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. I'll be as quick as I can. So I'm a professor of marketing at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia in the U.S. And I specialize in consumer behavior. My background, my training is in psychology, social psychology. And so I've been studying consumers and brands for way too many years. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great companies to help them to understand what their brands mean, not from their perspective, but from their customers' perspective. So in that process, as you mentioned, I'm also a textbook author, and I have that consumer behavior book and some others as well, and have now decided that it's also fun to write a real book. So the book that you're referring to is, which I guess we'll talk about, is a trade book, not a textbook, and so it really gives me the opportunity to focus on some of the cutting edge stuff that I'm seeing out there in terms of how consumers' relationships with experience providers and marketers of all stripes, how that is fundamentally changing, and we really need to be aware of that going forward. So it's a brave new world out there. Even without COVID, it would be a brave new world, but it's even braver now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and you can mention it. So let's give the book a name. It's called The New Chameleons, How to Connect with Customers Who Defy Categorization. And I kind of read it, and I read it, the kind of the preamble, the synopsis, and then thrashed my way through it and stuff. But rather than me kind of telling everybody about the book, I mean, can you give us a bit of a, can I give an overview of what the book's about and how it came about and kind of what the main thesis of the book is?
Sure. So, I'm coming from the vantage point of someone who's been teaching marketing and practicing it for, I hate to say it, about 40 years.
Mhm.
And one of the bedrock assumptions that we make is that traditional market segmentation is a great idea. And in many cases it is. But what that means is that we're looking at consumers as if they can be pigeonholed into these convenient categories like males in their 20s or something like that,
Sure.
or recreational shoppers, whatever the segment may be that we want to name it. And we assume that everybody we put into that homogeneous segment is pretty much the same, as others in that segment, and therefore will respond identically to whatever we tell them. And that logic made sense for a lot of years back in the last century, when we were more of a broadcasting kind of people rather than a narrow casting kind of people.
Sure.
Today, of course, we have the ability to reach people, I think, on a much more personalized level. And so what I found in research that I've done, and looking at what others have done, many of the basic categories that we use to pigeonhole people. And by the way, what psychologists know is that we have a tendency, when we give something a name, to think that we understand it, and then we can move on, pick that box and move on. So,
Yeah.
if it's males in their 20s, well, I've given them a name and now I understand them. And so what I found is that many of these fundamental assumptions, and often they are dichotomies, by the way. Often we love to put people, the most basic one that we all do, and this is the way our brains are wired to operate. When we encounter something new, whether it's a person or brand or whatever it is, we make a fundamental distinction in milliseconds often, and that is good or bad, friend or foe. Is it going to help me or kill me?
Yeah.
And we make other kinds of dichotomies as well. And so what I've done in the book, I'm talking about the new chameleons. And so this is a great metaphor, I think, for the new customers, especially younger ones today.
Yeah.
Is, as you know, chameleons change their coloration as they encounter new environments, and there's no limit on the number of times that they'll do that.
Mm.
And I think that people today are a lot more like chameleons, in the sense that we're constantly trying on new identities, as consumers who have access to so much of what's going on in the world outside of our little homes, with the internet and all that, and travel, of course, when that comes back. We have the ability to be much more proactive today than we were in the last century, I guess, because we can pick and choose the brands that make sense to us and that speak to us and that really resonate with us, because they're part of our identities. And so as we travel through our days, we have different experiences, and we're in different environments. And when you're an expert on customer experience, and that there's a lot of focus on customer journey mapping and all of that kind of thing. And I think that's really in sync with what I'm saying here, which is that what we're doing there is we're recognizing that people aren't just waking up one morning and deciding to buy something. They've gone through a process, and often that process is part of some project that they're working on. And by that I mean some part of their identity, that they want to be younger or hipper or more beautiful or better at their job or a better parent, whatever it is. Those are some of the identities that we take on. And so the chameleons really do defy categorization. And I know that whenever I talk to my students, for example, and I bait them a little bit. I say, well, you're all, young people, you're all in your early 20s, you live in an urban area in the northeastern United States. Therefore, you're all the same, right? I don't have to ask you individually what you like. And of course, as you might expect, they don't take to that too kindly, because they each think of themselves as quite the individual. And so, we're seeing this new era of consumer proactivity. This is to me the biggest marketing development in the last 20 or 30 years, so-called Web 2.0, where consumers are talking back to the producers, and therefore much of the dialogue about that customer experience is actually independent of the company. It's people, it's ordinary people having these conversations and following the recommendations, whether it's of influencers or people in their network, but they're clearly not just adhering to that old linear model, top-down model where companies talk to their customers. Today, companies have to talk with their customers, and keep in mind that those customers are chameleons that may not be the same in an hour when you talk to them as when you talk to them now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of right, and I think it's fascinating some of the themes you explore in the book, but rather than actually kind of telling people, verbatim kind of what the book's about, I wanted to explore a few of the different sort of themes and areas in the book, just to give people a bit of a flavor of some of the things that you're sort of you're wrestling with, or you're trying to sort of, if you like, shed light on. And the thing I wanted to start with is, in the book you talked about the difference between horizontal and vertical thinking. And when I read that, I was like, what? And so I thought, I have to ask Michael to explain that, if you will.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I've been trying to explain it to marketing managers for about 20 years. They don't want to listen to me. But what I mean by that very, very quickly is that, if you're selling something, whatever it is, you're in a vertical, right? By definition,
Right.
you tend to benchmark, what you're doing to your closest competitors, and that's a good thing, strategically. But what it means is that you're primarily focused on, for example, your market share within that vertical. What are the most popular brands within that vertical?
Right.
But so that's thinking vertically.
Right.
The problem is that your customers don't think that way. Frankly, they really don't care about your market share, and they don't care how popular you are. They want to know if your brand is going to be part of their story. And when we tell that story about ourselves through our consumption choices, we're telling the story using a lot of different products and services, not just that one vertical. So to give you a few quick examples, I think will make this more obvious.
Sure.
If you're a lamp manufacturer, you worry a lot about lamps, and you worry about the other companies that are making lamps. But you, Adrian, as a consumer, when you let's say you want to redo your living room, right? So you visit various stores and websites and talk to people. You're not searching for a lamp. You're searching for a lamp as part of an ensemble of other products, whether it's floor coverings, couches, artwork, tables, on and on. So that lamp is part, and it can be the most beautiful lamp in the world, but if it doesn't harmonize with, let's say, the style that you're going for, you're probably not going to choose it. So, and the same thing goes with a lot of other products, when you we could put this in almost any category. I could say, a company sells a shirt, but you buy an outfit. You buy a coat and maybe a tie, although I don't know if people are buying ties anymore. But you're also maybe buying accessories and a briefcase and shoes and even a car to boot. You're buying all of these things that are part of this identity you're trying to express. And so many of, and furthermore, and this is based on research that I've done over the years, as well as others, we know that consumers expect, if they associate certain products, they expect them to happen together, even if they functionally have nothing to do with one another. So when I start to, recite the products that might belong, let's say, to a stereotype, let's use one in your part of the world. And I don't know if this is still relevant or not, but chavs, is that still something people talk about?
Well, not really talk about, but it still is a bit of a thing. It's in the kind of, I think it's in the kind of like the vernacular, but only with them that actually remember kind of when.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit, I know it's a bit dated, but I enjoyed learning about it. And, because it's about these, I guess you might say, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, lower middle class people who are wearing some flashy clothing and designer clothing, especially Burberry.
Yeah.
To express this identity, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And once people start, if they're knowledgeable about that stereotype, or maybe we think about another, maybe it's a dated one. I think in the UK you call them Sloan Rangers. We call
Yeah,
them,
there's another one from history as well. Yes.
yeah, I'm dating myself, but we call them yuppies.
Yeah.
But if I say that someone's a yuppie, then you expect, maybe you expect them to drink white wine, eat brie cheese, wear a Rolex, and we could have an updated version of that today that might involve some very expensive baby strollers and other products.
Yeah.
But the
Then you
point
get
is
then you get the hipster kind of category and stuff,
the
which I think is
hipster, exactly, and we have plenty of those. So in each case, when people are pursuing that identity, for better or worse, the way they're doing that is looking across these verticals to create what we might think of as an ensemble, or what I call a product constellation, a set of products that go together because socially they go together, not because they go together functionally. And the point is that if you start thinking like your consumers and thinking horizontally, it opens up a lot of interesting opportunities. For example, co-branding, or licensing, where you as that lamp manufacturer might actually do something with someone who makes floor coverings or tables, because the consumer is buying a style, not buying a lamp. And
right.
so that's a somewhat long-winded explanation maybe, but it's an extremely powerful way to look at things. And again, putting yourself in the shoes of your customer, just remember they're not buying product X or service X. They're buying something that goes with the other sets of products and services that make sense to them. So they think horizontally.
Okay. But then you also kind of suggested, kind of like prior to that, you know, customers are kind of like are prone to sort of change their mind, or how they view themselves, or their narrative kind of will change sometimes from 1 hour to the next, or from one day to the next. And so I guess my question um is is I mean, do marketeers really know their customers, or can organizations really know their customers? And if not, what do they need to do to sort of be able to kind of, I feel like, get to know them better, or collapse that distance between them and their customers, so they can at least not know, maybe not know them, but at least understand them?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And, and I think the answer is that they can still know them, and they can actually know them to a much greater degree, more nuanced than they know them today, because they've just put them into a broad category, and they've used some, 7-point survey to have them answer some questions, what have you. And that's valuable up to a point, but they can know them. But what they have to understand is that each customer is actually many customers.
Right.
And so to give you a concrete example of a shift in thinking, there's a very, very large multinational that makes snack foods and things like that. And what they've done over the last couple of years is they've actually realigned their marketing department that used to be focused on, brand X that they made, brand Y that they made. Now they are focused primarily on occasions.
Right.
And so on certain occasions, we have different snacking behaviors.
Right.
It might be before a football game, whether your version or our version of a football game, or
Yeah.
it might be at a party, or at a formal dinner, whatever it is. And so they've organized around that. And so what that means is they have brand managers who are managing very, very different physical products, but are now working together because they understand that they may have, for example, they may have beverages. They may have another division that makes beverages, like soft drinks, that are consumed simultaneously with popcorn or chips,
Right.
And so what they've done is they're thinking a bit more horizontally there. And that is the answer. Part of the answer, at least, is to do the kind of journey mapping that I think you would espouse, and recognize that as people are moving in different situations and taking on new identities, you have different usage occasions or different and probably more opportunities to sell them. So for example, if you're, let's say you make a fragrance,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of women out there who like to put on a different fragrance if they go to work versus going out on a date.
Right.
They have a different fragrance because they're a different person. And so there you have, I guess, the opportunity not just to sell them their date fragrance, but maybe you can also sell them a go to work fragrance to express a different facet of their identity.
Yeah. Fascinating. So the other thing I wanted to, well, one of the next things I made of, because I made a bit of a list sort of thing, and about things that sort of jumped out at me in the book, and I wanted to ask you around about this idea that people talk about, oh, we have to give customers choice, and that's one of the things that we kind of say, our choice is like everything. We need to get more and more choice. But is there a myth around the idea that customers want choice?
Yeah, there is. This is a really interesting paradox because we do, as you say, we've seen over the years in a lot of industries, whether it's appliances or tech or automotive, the assumption is that the more choice you give people, the better they are. And in an abstract sense, that's true. We like to have choice,
Hmm.
but it's really more it's more curvilinear. That is, you reach an inflection point where you actually give people too much choice.
Yeah.
And so ironically, and research supports this as well as common observation, I think, you reach a point where there are so many different options out there. Our brains are really not able to process all that. We just don't have the wiring to do that. And so what
Yeah.
do? We tend to throw up our hands and say, you know what, I can't do this, or I'm just going to grab the first one I see because I have other things to do in my life, rather than choosing from 100 shades of lipstick. I'm just going to grab the one that I see in the front, and so ironically, we have so-called feature creep, for example,
Right.
where a lot of manufacturers keep throwing in features. And what tends to happen is, for example, there was a very large electronics firm did a study on this. And this was back when we had something called DVDs. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
They seemed very modernistic at the time, but I guess they're outdated now. What they looked at all of their products that were returned because they were not functioning correctly,
Uh-huh.
returned for a refund. And what they found was that, if I recall, about 60% of those, in fact, of those products worked perfectly. The problem was that the consumer couldn't figure out how to work them
Right.
because there were so many features and so many directions, probably most of them in Japanese, but there was, it was just too daunting of a task, and so they just gave up on it. And
Yeah.
so the key, the sweet spot, the key is finding that inflection point where you're certainly giving them choice, but not as much. And so we're seeing that, for example, in the automotive industry, a few years ago, companies like Toyota would, if you bought a car, you might have to make literally several hundred decisions in terms of the color of this or the, whatever the different options are.
Hmm.
And today you're more likely to see a package, where you buy a certain package and it comes with a certain kind of upholstery and certain,
Mm.
certain capabilities and so on. And I think that's partially a response to the feedback that they may have been getting from customers saying, hey, give me a break here. Life is too short to sit here and make nothing but a bunch of choices where you could do it for me. And of course, the other aspect of this, everybody's talking about influencers and all that stuff. That's a big reason why we need influencers today, because what they are doing is curating all of these choices for us and narrowing them down. So we're relying on them, rightly or wrongly, to do the heavy lifting,
Yeah.
to go into the channel and say, well, you know what, there's 1,000 options here, but these are the 20 that I think you would like.
Right. Interesting. So then the next thing on my list I had was this idea about you made a reference to James Cameron's film Avatar, and you went on to build on that and talked about the idea that about the digital and physical kind of realms. I mean, and how they're separate but integrated, and there's it's a dimension, if you like, that marketeers are having to if you like get their heads around and understand how that feeds into the kind of the psyche of their customers. I mean, so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's another one of these false dichotomies that used to make sense but doesn't anymore, and that is the distinction of online versus offline.
Right.
So back in the day, when the internet was new and all that, we would say, I'm going online now. And of course, that was a process, you may remember, having to
Yeah.
dial in and all that,
Back in the days of dial-up.
And now I'm done, and I'm done visiting that website. I'm going to go offline. So there's always, even though we were spending more time online, we always were conscious of whether we were online or offline. And now you fast forward to today, and really that distinction has gone away. And one reason for that is, especially among younger people, but not just, we are simultaneously online and offline all day and all night.
Sure.
If you look at the data, and it's kind of scary. If you look at the in Western Europe and in the US, if you look at the number of hours that young adults spend looking at a screen on average per day, that number is approaching 11 hours per day. And it's gone up rapidly over the last 5 or 10 years and probably will continue. What that means is that a good chunk of our existence, at least when we're awake, is being spent online. And so marketers need to understand that it's not an either or decision. Should I have an online strategy or an offline strategy? We hear a lot of talk today about multi-channel consumers and multi-channel marketing, and that's really part of what I'm saying, is that distinction. When you plan a new customer experience, you should be building in at least some online aspects to, even if it's just a traditional brick and mortar store that has, that will survive the pandemic and all that. Why is it that you don't have online experiences there? In other words, what people are looking for is a hybrid experience, right. And so when my students are sitting in class, ostensibly listening to me, they're also, obviously, they think I don't know, but of course I do. They're looking on their phones, they're checking their Facebook, looking to see if their boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with them while I'm lecturing. And so they are seamlessly making this transition back and forth all day long. So why are we saying, do I need an online strategy? Well, of course you do, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have to relinquish your offline strategy. And ironically, some of the innovators, the pure play companies that started without any physical stores, like Warby Parker. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yes, I am.
Or Birchbox, they're actually starting to experiment with opening physical stores. So they're moving in the other direction.
Sure.
And that's exactly what they should be doing, because the future is multi-channel. Actually, the present is multi-channel. So let's throw away this distinction. It just doesn't buy us anything.
Yeah. I mean, so the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, because so that gives us a flavor of some of the stuff that you're exploring in the book. I mean, but there'll be many firms that are sort of behind in this, are still taking a more of a traditional sort of approach to it. But there'll also be a couple of examples of organizations they're out in front. They exemplify the sort of understanding of their customers that you write about. So do you have a couple of examples of firms that you think, they're doing some really clever things, and
I mean, one important aspect of this, and one of the other obsolete dichotomies I discuss in the book is the distinction we make between producers of the good or service and consumers.
Right.
And I think that's very germane to your question, because what you see is, there are still a lot of traditional companies that believe that, let's say you're preparing a new product for launch. I mean, Apple is the worst offender. It's hard to criticize their success, but they're famous for this, as I'm sure you know. Before they were releasing a new iPhone, I mean, some designs have been released by accident, right? Workers have left them in bars, and people are jumping on that. What that means is that, you're not allowed to peek under the kimono until this thing is absolutely positively perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, I don't think that that's a solution that works very well in a world that's always in beta.
Right.
And so software developers really, I think, pioneered this notion, of getting the users to help them debug their programs, acknowledging that they're, by definition, they're not perfect, because you're going to find flaws, you're going to find bugs in my programming, that I want you to find them. And so some companies have definitely figured this out, that actually their customer has other jobs in the company. They're also product designers if they allow them to be, for
Yeah.
example. They're also advertisers if they allow them to help with that. So a company like, let's say, Lego,
Yeah.
very very successful now. That at one point, about 20 years ago, I believe, they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and I think they changed their perspective, and they said, let's rely on our customers to help guide us out of this mess we're in, because they are the source of the best ideas about what we should be doing with new Lego products.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started to develop really this co-creator model, where they have maybe more, but I think they have at least 10,000 members, who belong to this group, and they incentivize them. If someone suggests an idea for a new product and they adopt it, they'll financially reward that person, I believe. And there are other companies like that in different industries. And ironically, the innovation came in kind of boring, so to speak, B2B industries like the chemical industry and manufacturing, where for many years they've known that the majority of new product ideas come from their best customers.
Right.
And it's a really, it shouldn't be a radical notion, but for a lot of companies it is, because they've been ingrained to think that it's all about being shrouded in secrecy. And so one of the best things that you can do to kind of catch up is just to acknowledge that your best resource, well, there's two best resources that are overlooked, I think. The first is your employees.
Mm-hmm.
The second is your customers.
Yeah.
And in both cases, they're the ones who have their ear to the ground and really understand what's going on out there. So to exclude that kind of input earlier on in the process is a crime, I think.
And do you think there's, the people the firms that tap into, if you like, that level of collective intelligence, either from their best customers and from their employees, are they the ones that are going to define the future of service and experience, do you think? Because they're the ones that are going to be out front, and everybody else is going to be chasing them down?
I think that I would think so, yes. And one reason is, that the biggest issue today, in my opinion, is customer engagement. How do we get the attention of jaded people who are bombarded with thousands of choices, as we've been discussing, et cetera? There are a variety of ways that you can engage your customers to a greater extent. First of all, we understand from consumer research that my colleagues and I do, that when people are more engaged, that's a really good thing. It's a very good thing to promote, because people are processing information about your brand much better, and on and on. So how do we get to that point? And we could talk about different paths to engagement, but one of them is fairly simple, and that is what we've been talking about. Sometimes it's called the IKEA effect, which is that we're more engaged with something if we helped to produce it.
Sure.
And so I always talk about a humble bookcase that you might build from IKEA, and for me, that means having a few parts left over when you don't know where they went. But
Yeah.
but it also means that, you can imagine that if I build that bookcase, every time I walk by that bookcase in my home or office, it's not just a piece of wood to me. It's something that I participated in, and it's part of who I am. It's part of my identity project.
Sure.
And therefore, that is a path to engagement. And so if you've got two companies that both make the same thing, offer the same product or service. One is involving the customer as a participant and even a co-creator. The other regards the customer as a passive couch potato who just is going to, listen to their messages and hopefully go out and follow them. I know which one I would put my money on.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also, I know that I think that, as a psychologist, I'm sure you're, or somebody with a background in psychology, I'm sure you would agree that language is important. How we describe things is important. And so when you end up with hearing people in organizational contexts talking, when they talk about customers, then they're still referring to wallet share, it sort of just, it strikes the wrong chord, really.
Oh, I absolutely, and actually, I many years ago with a partner I had, we formed a small consulting company that's called Mindshare for that
Right.
very reason. Um, and that's what it is. It's about share of mind. Share of wallet is very nice, but that can come later, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, that share is going to be much bigger if you can get share of mind, or share of experience, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And keeping remembering that our minds are not infinite. We have limited capacity. So if someone else's brand has a greater share of that cranium,
Yeah.
that means you have less by definition. It's to some extent a zero-sum game. It's not infinite.
Absolutely. And so, Michael, is there anything else anything else you want to say about the book? 'Cause, I mean, I think it's fascinating. As you say, it's a trade book, so it's not written as an academic sort of text or teaching kind of book, but it's more, as you say, in the more of the trade sphere. So it's actually quite practical, and it's organized around different chapters with takeaways and everything else, and it's all fully researched and resourced and things. And so I think it's a great piece of work. But I mean, anything else you think that you'd
Yeah.
add about the book before I ask
Well,
you a couple of final questions?
yeah, thank you, and thanks for your kind words about it. I think what I'd like to do is to encourage people to step back, take a different look at what you're doing, redefine what you're doing, and understand that some of the basic categories, whatever your industry is, there you can identify categories and usually those categories are things that customers have no idea about.
Sure.
So you're calibrating your efforts to a totally different metric than they're using. And when you start to think about, well, when you start to question those, you see a lot of new opportunities. So for example, one of the dichotomies that I talk about that's obsolete, painfully obvious to us now, I wrote the book before COVID, just before COVID, but one of those is work versus play, or
Right.
versus office, if you will. And we've seen that dichotomy totally explode, right? And it's not going to go back to where it was in terms of people going back to offices and, this is what I do in the office, this is what I do in my home. And they'll never meet up because they're totally different spheres of existence. Not true anymore. So a lot of, for example, companies that make various kinds of home products, home office products and so on. Some of them were quick to figure out that there's new opportunities here because we're no longer selling just in the home or just in the office channel. It's a whole new world. And so many of these very basic distinctions, male versus female is another one of those, income, rich versus poor. These things don't really mean very much in this much more complicated world where everybody has their own individual projects.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. So, Michael, just to wrap up, I want to wrap up with as I explained to you before we started the interview, that I've been doing a piece of, I think, what we call longitudinal research with everybody that been having on the podcast, where I think that's right, longitudinal. Anyway, it's a series of questions I've been asking every person I've been having on the podcast about what sort of words they would use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience as I collect this kind of tapestry of kind of words to try and build up almost not like a word cloud, but almost like a bit of a broad picture.
So what one word would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer
Yeah,
experience?
I love that analogy, Adrian. And I guess the word I would use is authenticity.
Perfect.
Um, and really that's what people are looking for today. Again, especially younger people we know, but I think all of us, are really pushing back. And obviously the pandemic accelerated this perhaps, but they're really pushing back against this, this kind of hype environment where they perceive, rightly or wrongly, that marketers are just, making stuff up as they go. They want to know, for example, they want to know the backstory of the companies they're doing business with. They want to know what they're doing in the community, et cetera. And they want them to be authentic. So I always, if I'm giving a talk to a trade group or something, I tell people, look, if your business has a story, like a founder's story,
Mm-hmm.
like Hewlett Packard, the two guys in the garage, that's a
Mm-hmm.
classic founder's story. If you have a story to tell, then tell it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I'm not sure if that's going to make you a punk rock musician like the Ramones, but it's going to make you much more real to your customers. And anything you can do to be more real to them, show them that there's a real person on the other end of the phone. That to me is a punk approach, at least when it comes to marketing.
Perfect. Thank you. And then the final one, just to extend that a little bit, is that what sort of company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of, as you say, punk CX ethos, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one that comes to mind that I'm not sure if it's really syncs with your definition, but Zappos
Yeah.
is famous for customer service. And I had the opportunity to visit their call center in Las Vegas a few years ago, and I was really struck by the kind of controlled lunacy that was going on there.
Yeah.
They really encouraged the call center employees to be really authentic, I guess you
Yes.
would say. And they were working in cubicles, but all their cubicles were decorated with all kinds of stuff, whereas at some other companies they don't allow you to bring in anything personal, so it's very inauthentic. So there was kind of almost a punk approach to it. I mean, quite honestly, I thought it was a little bit managed. I think they were trying a little too hard to be punky in a sense,
Right.
by scheduling spontaneous events during the day to like dropping an egg from the third floor to see if it would crack at the bottom. They would have contests, and that was all great. It was a fun place to work. So
Mm.
I guess anything you can do to encourage that in the world of cubicles makes them a bit more punk.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Michael. And I would kind of definitely support the Zappos in that category. I've always been a fan of their approach and their work, and and what they do. So, but just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming on and telling us about the new book. Congratulations on the new book. I know it's a bit of a sort of departure because it's a trade book, but I think it's a treasure trove of insights. And so wanted just to say, well, congratulations on that, and thank you for being on the podcast today, just to tell us about it. That's been great.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I really appreciate first the fact that you read it. I love it. But, I enjoyed writing this book a lot. I think it is very accessible, and I would love to get feedback on some of these ideas that I'm putting forward. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me and tell me I'm full of it, let me know. Bring it on. I want to have a punk experience.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Michael.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.